With his distinctive sound and rebellious spirit, Waylon Jennings, a legendary figure in country music, left an unforgettable mark on the genre. This man, whose voice has defined an entire era, has suddenly dropped an admission that no one ever saw coming. At 64, this is the kind of confession that makes you sit up, widen your eyes, and rethink everything you thought you knew about him. In this narrative, we'll delve into his most personal confessions. Trust me, you're going to want to stay for every word. Waylon Jennings' story begins in the wide-open, dusty plains of West Texas, a place where the horizon seems endless and the cotton fields stretch as far as the eye can see. Born on June 15, 1937, near a little town called Littlefield, Jennings' life wasn't one of glitz and glamour right from the start. In fact, his beginnings were about as humble as you could get. Waylon was the eldest child of William and Lorene Jennings, and when he was born, they named him Wayland. But things changed quickly. His mom started calling him Waylon to avoid confusion with a nearby school named Wayland Baptist College. Funny how a small change like that can stick. The Jennings family, though deeply rooted in their faith, were more of a Church of Christ household than Baptist. Like many Southern families at the time, they loved music, especially listening to the Grand Ole Opry on the radio. Waylon spent years evading one topic in particular, but at 64, he finally came forward with a confession everyone had been waiting for. What took him so long? And what does his admission reveal about his true self? This is the story of Waylon Jennings that no one ever thought they'd hear. Make sure you stick around until the end. His heartfelt revelation will forever change the way you view one of country music's biggest legends. Waylon's father, William, worked tirelessly, doing whatever jobs he could find. Farm labor, truck driving, you name it, just to keep food on the table. Young Waylon pitched in, too, working in those cotton fields alongside his family. It was a grueling experience that shaped not only his perspective on life, but also the gritty, real stories he later told through his music. You can almost feel the dusty fields in the chords of some of his songs. But there was always something else in Waylon's life: music. His dad, though just an amateur musician, loved to play harmonica and guitar, and you can imagine him introducing little Waylon to those first sweet notes. By the age of 8, Waylon's mom, Lorene, was teaching him guitar herself. The first song she taught him was 30 Pieces of Silver. It was a simple tune, but it was enough to light a spark in him. From that point on, Waylon practiced obsessively, borrowing relatives' instruments until his mother scraped together enough money to buy him his very own guitar, a used Stella. Not long after, she upgraded him to a Harmony Patrician, and boy, did that guitar get some use. Waylon's musical influences were as varied as they come, especially for a kid growing up in a small Texas town. He loved everything from Bob Wills' Western swing to the honky-tonk sounds of Floyd Tillman, Ernest Tubb, and Hank Williams. Add a little rock and roll from Carl Smith and Elvis Presley, and you've got the recipe for the unique sound that Waylon would go on to develop. Even as a kid, it was clear Waylon had talent. He wasn't just a boy with a guitar. He was a performer. He started out playing at family gatherings, but soon moved on to bigger crowds. Well, as big as crowds could get in a small town like Littlefield. His first public performance happened at the local youth center with a friend named Anthony Bonanno. Before long, he was performing at JC's, Lions clubs, and any other local gigs he could find. One of his first big wins came when he sang "Hey Joe" in a talent show on Channel 13 in Lubbock. He even became a regular performer at the Palace Theater's local talent nights. Can't you just picture it? A young boy with a big guitar, playing his heart out for anyone who would listen. By the time one was 14, he was itching for more. That's when he auditioned for KV, a local radio station in Littlefield. J.B. McShann, the station's owner, was so impressed by Juan's style that he gave him a weekly 30-minute radio show. Think about that for a second. 14 years old and already hosting his own radio show. Talk about an early start. Those radio gigs not only helped him develop his voice, but also taught him the ins and outs of the music business, skills that would be crucial in his later career. But here's where things get really interesting. 2 years later, at the ripe old age of 16, Juan decided school just wasn't for him. He dropped out of high school and quit picking cotton for good. He had bigger dreams, dreams of making music his full-time gig. So, in 1954, he moved to Lubbock, Texas, where he snagged a job at radio station KLLL. It was in Lubbock that fate stepped in. One crossed paths with none other than Buddy Holly. Yes, the Buddy Holly. One and Buddy met at a local restaurant, and from there, a special bond formed. Holly, who was already well on his way to becoming a rock and roll icon, saw something in Juan. He became a mentor to the young musician, helping him polish his sound and showing him the ropes of the industry. Eventually, Holly even produced Juan's first single, Joel Blonde, in 1958. That wasn't just a professional collaboration. It was the start of a deep friendship that would profoundly shape the rest of Juan's life. Can you imagine the kind of confidence that gave a young, up-and-coming musician like Jennings? Having someone like Buddy Holly in his corner was invaluable. The rest, as they say, is history. Waylon Jennings was on his way, and it all started in that little West Texas town with a used guitar and a heart full of music. Isn't it wild to think how far he came from those cotton fields? Waylon Jennings, the man known for his rugged voice and outlaw image, has finally come clean at the age of 64, and what he admitted is exactly what we suspected all along. But there's more to the story than you think, and it will surprise even the most loyal of fans. Make sure you stay until the end, because Waylon's long-awaited confession will take you on a journey through the highs and lows of a legend's life. The Winter Dance Party Tour tragedy in early 1959 thrust Waylon Jennings into the spotlight when he joined Buddy Holly's Winter Dance Party Tour as the bass player. You'd think it would have been an exciting time, traveling with legends like Ritchie Valens and J.P. the Big Bopper Richardson, crisscrossing the Midwest and playing to screaming crowds. It had all the makings of a rock and roll dream. But instead, the tour quickly became infamous for its sheer misery. The schedule was brutal, and the life these young stars were living was far from glamorous. Let's not even talk about the tour bus. It broke down constantly, leaving the musicians stranded in some of the most bitterly cold weather you can imagine. There was one trip in particular that still sends shivers down anyone's spine just thinking about it. They were on a 300-mile overnight journey when the bus decided it had enough, breaking down in the middle of nowhere. No heat, no escape from the sub-zero temperatures. They were so desperate that they resorted to burning newspapers for warmth. The thought of aspiring to be a rising star, dreaming of the glitz and glam of fame, and instead being stuck on a broken bus in the dead of winter, hoping anyone, would come along and rescue you, is chilling. But that was Waylon Jennings' reality at a point. Eventually, Buddy Holly had enough of this nightmare. He decided that for the next leg of the tour, a 400-mile trip from Clear Lake, Iowa, to Moorhead, Minnesota, he wasn't going to put up with the torturous bus ride again. So, he chartered a small plane, and you can't blame him, can you? Who wouldn't want to avoid another endless night on that freezing bus? Initially, Waylon Jennings was supposed to be on that flight with him, but in a twist of fate, Jennings gave up his seat to the Big Bopper, who was battling the flu and just couldn't take another bus ride. Here's where things get really haunting. Before they parted ways, Holly and Jennings shared what was supposed to be some playful banter. Holly, being the jokester he was, teased Jennings, saying, "I hope your damn bus freezes up again." Not one to be outdone, Jennings shot back with a quip of his own. "Well, I hope your old plane crashes." Those words, meant as nothing more than a joke, would come to haunt Jennings for years to come. Because on that fateful night, February 3rd, 1959, the plane carrying Buddy Holly, Ritchie Valens, and J.P. Richardson crashed, killing everyone on board instantly. The tragedy became known as the day the music died, immortalized in Don McLean's iconic song, American Pie. Can you even begin to imagine how that must have felt for Jennings? To know that he was supposed to be on that plane, but wasn't. And then to remember those chilling last words he exchanged with Holly? For Waylon Jennings, the crash wasn't just a tragic event. It was something that deeply affected him on a personal level. He carried the heavy weight of survivor's guilt, tormented by the idea that somehow his words had jinxed the flight. For years, he didn't talk about it, keeping his feelings bottled up inside. He later admitted in a 1999 interview with CMT, "I was so afraid for many years that somebody was going to find out I said that. Somehow, I blamed myself, compounding that was the guilty feeling that he was still alive. I hadn't contributed anything to the world at that time compared to Buddy, he said. One can feel the heaviness in those words. He truly believed that he didn't deserve to survive when someone as brilliant as Buddy Holly didn't. It wasn't just emotional baggage either. The trauma nearly caused Jennings to give up music altogether. After the crash, he finished the remaining 2 weeks of the tour, but when it was all over, he returned to Texas with zero intention of ever picking up his guitar again. He was done, or at least that's what he thought at the time. The man who would go on to define outlaw country almost walked away from it all before his career even began. But somehow, through the grief and guilt, Jennings found a way to move forward. He never forgot the lessons he learned from Holly, though. In fact, they helped shape the artist and man he became. Holly had taught him to be true to himself, to go against the grain, and to carve out his own path. And that's exactly what Jennings did. He embraced the spirit of rebellion, and in the 1970s, he became one of the leading figures in the outlaw country movement, forever leaving his mark on the world of music. So, while the Winter Dance Party Tour may have been marred by unspeakable tragedy, it also left an unforgettable impact on Waylon Jennings. It wasn't just about the music or the fame. It was about life, loss, and finding the strength to carry on even when the weight of guilt and sorrow felt unbearable. Outlaw country pioneer in the 1970s, Waylon Jennings shook up the world of country music in a way no one saw coming. Nashville had its own established sound, and if you wanted to make it big, you had to play by their rules. But Jennings? He wasn't having any of it. He found the traditional Nashville scene to be way too controlling, like a cage where creativity was stifled and artists were just churning out what the bigwigs wanted. That just didn't sit right with him. So, what did he do? He led a rebellion. Yep, you heard that right, a full-on revolt against the polished, predictable Nashville sound. Jennings wasn't about to let someone else dictate his artistic vision. In 1972, after years of frustration, Jennings finally broke free when he renegotiated his contract with RCA. This new deal gave him something precious: full creative control over his music. It was more than a business move. It was a declaration of independence, and it changed the game for country music. Jennings took that freedom and ran with it, creating something raw, authentic, and entirely his own. He changed his sound and his entire vibe. Gone were the shiny rhinestone-studded suits that made him look like every other country star of the day. Instead, Jennings embraced a more rugged image, complete with long hair and leather jackets. And his music? It was a bold fusion of southern rock and country that didn't just tiptoe around the edge of rebellion. It jumped right in. Fans loved it. Critics loved it. Suddenly, this new outlaw style wasn't just an alternative to mainstream country. It was the future. One of the biggest highlights of Jennings' outlaw era was his collaboration with Willie Nelson, another country rebel who wasn't afraid to stir the pot. Their partnership was pure magic, resulting in hit after hit. Together, they became the dynamic duo of the outlaw country movement. Ever heard of the song Good-Hearted Woman? It's a classic co-written by Jennings and Nelson in the mid-70s, and it became an anthem for anyone who felt like Nashville wasn't cutting it anymore. They didn't just dominate the charts. They won awards, including the Country Music Association's Duo of the Year award for the very same song. Their chemistry was undeniable, and it helped propel both of them into country music royalty. Then there was the iconic Waylon and Willie album in 1978. The record had a certain rebellious swagger, and its standout single, Mamas Don't Let Your Babies Grow Up to Be Cowboys, was so infectious that it spent 4 weeks at the top of the country charts. It didn't stop there, though. They even snagged a Grammy for it. Can you believe it? Two country rebels who refused to play by the rules ended up with some of the biggest honors in music. If that's not poetic, what is? But we can't talk about Jennings without mentioning one of his biggest solo hits, Luckenbach, Texas, Back to the Basics of Love. Released in 1977, this song didn't just top the charts. It became a symbol of everything the outlaw country movement stood for. The lyrics tapped into a nostalgic yearning for simpler times, something that resonated with people then and still does today. Funny thing is, despite the song's success, Jennings didn't even perform in Luckenbach until July 4, 1997, 20 years after recording it. Throughout this entire outlaw phase, Jennings wasn't just pushing musical boundaries. he was tackling some pretty controversial topics too. His songs often touched on taboo subjects like substance use, fame, and its dark underbelly. You know how some artists shy away from talking about their personal demons? Well, not Jennings. He took his struggles with substance misuse and turned them into art. Take I Can Get Off on You, for example, a song he did with Willie Nelson. It's about new love triumphing over old vices, and there's no doubt it echoed Jennings' own battles at the time. He didn't hide from his flaws. He embraced them. That honesty is part of what made him so relatable to fans. At 64, Jennings finally let the truth out, confirming what many of us had suspected for years. What did this country legend keep hidden for so long, and why is it coming to light now? His candid admission is something his fans have been waiting to hear, and it will leave you reflecting on the man behind the music. Stay with us until the end, because the full story behind Jennings' confession is even more powerful than anyone could have imagined. Personal struggles and addiction. Waylon Jennings' personal life was as stormy as his legendary music career. The man was married not once, not twice, but 4 times. Talk about a roller coaster. His first marriage came early, at just 18, when he tied the knot with Maxine Carol Lawrence. They had 4 children together, but managing a growing family while his music career was taking off wasn't easy. Imagine being on the road, living the wild life of a rising country star, and then trying to balance all of that with the responsibilities of home life. It just didn't work out. Add to that the growing shadow of substance abuse, and it's no surprise that marriage ended in divorce. Who could really juggle it all without something giving way? Then, in his mid-20s, Jennings gave marriage another shot, this time with Lynn Jones. While they didn't have kids together, he did adopt a child during their 5-year marriage. But just like the first time, his lifestyle, the constant pressures of fame, and the ongoing battle with his personal demons, mainly substances, led to another split. By now, it seemed like a pattern was forming. Can you imagine how tough it must have been for Lynn to deal with all the chaos that came with being married to a music icon? The long tours, the erratic behavior fueled by substance use, and the unpredictable lifestyle must have been a lot to handle. After Lynn, Jennings' third attempt at marriage came with Barbara Roode. That union, too, didn't last long, proving once again that while Jennings had no trouble charming the world with his music, his personal life wasn't quite as smooth. But just when it seemed like he was destined to drift from one marriage to the next, something unexpected happened. Enter Jessie Coulter, the love of his life, and as fate would have it, his 4th and final wife. Their relationship was different, and it stood the test of time in a way his previous ones couldn't. Maybe it was because Jessie, being a singer herself, truly understood the demands of Jennings' career, or maybe they were just right for each other in a way the others hadn't been. But despite all their ups and downs, they stayed together until the very end. 4th time's the charm, right? Now, let's talk about Jennings' battle with substance use. It was no secret that Jennings' lifestyle was as wild as they come, especially in the 1970s and 1980s. This man was reportedly spending a mind-blowing $1,500 a day on cocaine. It got so bad that in August of 1977, he was arrested in a Nashville recording studio and charged with conspiracy and possession of the same hard substance with intent to distribute. Waylon Jennings' life took a pivotal turn when he met Jessie Coulter, the woman who would become his rock, his muse, and the love of his life. After 3 failed marriages, Jennings probably never imagined he'd find someone like her. The two met in Phoenix, Arizona, and the connection was instantaneous. There was something about Jessie, a talented singer-songwriter in her own right, that struck Jennings to his core. Maybe it was her spirit, her music, or just the fact that she saw him for who he truly was, beneath the outlaw persona he had built up over the years. They tied the knot in 1969, starting a partnership that was much more than just a marriage. It was a journey that would last until Jennings' death in 2002. Waylon often said that meeting Jessie was the best thing that ever happened to him. In a candid interview with Rolling Stone, he didn't shy away from admitting how low he had sunk before Jessie came into his life. When I met Jessie, I was pretty well at my lowest point, he said. I weighed 138 pounds and was bent on self-destruction. Wallowing in self-pity was the biggest part of it, staying depressed all the time and stoned. She stayed by his side, and according to Jennings, Jessie was the best thing that ever happened to me. Doesn't that just say it all? But Jessie's influence didn't stop at simply being there for him. She had a profound impact on his career, too. In fact, it wasn't long before her talents as a singer-songwriter began to shine, and Jennings helped her secure a record deal with RCA. The two were not only partners in life, but also collaborators in music. How often do you see that in the music industry? Two people who can thrive personally and professionally together. They even recorded the hit duet Suspicious Minds, which earned them a Grammy nomination in 1970. The success of their music together solidified them as a true power couple in the outlaw country scene. While Waylon was making waves in the genre, Jessie was right there with him, contributing her own unique voice to the movement. They were a force to be reckoned with. And let's talk about Jessie's role in helping Waylon through his most challenging times, particularly his battle with addiction. When Jennings finally decided to quit hard substances in 1984, it was Jessie who stood by him through the tough, often ugly process. This wasn't just your everyday kind of support. This was deep, unwavering love. They rented a house in the Arizona desert, canceled their gigs, and focused entirely on getting Waylon through withdrawal and healing. Jennings later said that it was Jessie's prayers and her presence that made all the difference in his recovery. It wasn't just about love. It was about faith and endurance. Their life wasn't just about their careers or Waylon's battles. In 1979, they welcomed their son, Shooter Jennings, into the world. Raising Shooter gave Waylon an additional reason to keep fighting his demons. For Jessie, their son became another beacon of light in their often tumultuous life together. After keeping this secret for years, Waylon Jennings finally spoke the truth at 64, and it's something we all suspected but never thought he'd admit. What was the country star hiding, and how does it change the way we understand his legacy? You want to hear the full story behind this revealing moment. Stay tuned till the very end, because Waylon's admission will leave you with more questions than answers. In a candid and revealing interview, Waylon Jennings, the legendary outlaw country singer, bared his soul about his troubled past and the heavy burden of his mistakes. At 64, Jennings finally seemed to have made peace with the guilt that had followed him like a shadow for decades. The most profound part of his confession came when he opened up about the tragic plane crash that claimed the life of his dear friend and mentor, Buddy Holly. With a deep sigh, Jennings admitted, "God Almighty, for years I thought I caused it." Those words shed light on the emotional storm he had been weathering all these years, revealing the tremendous guilt he had felt for something that, in truth, was beyond his control. Yet it haunted him. How does one come to terms with feeling responsible for the loss of a friend in such a tragic way? For Jennings, it was a long journey to acceptance. But the crash wasn't the only demon Jennings battled. He also had to confront his struggle with substance abuse, particularly his addiction during the prime of his career. The singer's habit spiraled out of control. At one point, Jennings admitted to spending as much as $1,500 a day on hard substances. Think about that, $1,500 a day. The addiction didn't just drain his bank account. It drained his spirit, too. The financial ruin that came with it was immense, with Jennings accumulating debts of up to $2.5 million. It's hard to even imagine climbing out of that kind of hole. But in 1984, Jennings did just that. Thanks to the unwavering support of his wife, Jessie Coulter, and his son, Shooter Jennings, he finally kicked the habit and said goodbye to hard substances. And though it was a victory, it came after years of chaos and loss. As Jennings looked back on his life, it became clear that he carried deep regret for the years lost to addiction. How could he not? The toll on his health was staggering. The same man who once ruled the stage with his booming voice and larger-than-life presence was now grappling with the consequences of his past choices. Type 2 diabetes hit hard, slowly chipping away at his health and mobility. The heartbreaking climax came in 2001 when Jennings' left foot had to be amputated due to complications from the disease. Yet through all this, Jennings found wisdom. There's something about looking back that forces people to see things in a clearer light, and Jennings was no exception. One of the most important lessons he shared in his interviews was simple yet profound. The hardest thing is saying the word no, turning things down. Isn't that true for all of us? Whether in our personal lives or careers, learning to say no can be one of the toughest yet most empowering things. Jennings knew this better than most. For years, he had said yes to temptation, yes to the pressures of fame, and yes to the vices that came with it. But later in life, he finally understood the value of setting boundaries and making choices that protected both his heart and his health. And if there's one thing Jennings believed in, it was authenticity. He encouraged artists to focus on meaningful content instead of chasing trends. After all, wasn't that what made him a legend in the first place? Even when record sales slowed down in the 90s, he still drew massive crowds to his live performances. Why? Because his fans knew he was the real deal. He didn't sell out. He didn't bend to what was popular at the moment. Instead, he stuck to his guns, pouring his soul into every song and performance. Jennings' career was a testament to the fact that true artistry isn't about the number of albums sold. It's about creating something that resonates, something that lasts. And speaking of lasting, Jennings left one final gift for his fans before he passed. His last album, Never Say Die, live, recorded at Nashville's Ryman Auditorium in January 2000. It was his way of saying that despite the trials, despite the mistakes, and despite the pain, his love for music never wavered. The album was a message to all who listened, a reminder to persevere and stay true to your vision, no matter the obstacles.